So thank you once again for joining us. Let's hope that a few more will join in perhaps a little later. So today what we had planned was just a couple of discussions around any questions that might be posted on the discussion forum. There were a few interesting ones, so we'll go through them and try to answer them collectively. I also wanted to go over week 3 a little bit with you. Of course, week 3's just started. It's just been a couple of days, so you might not have entirely completed your readings or engaged in all of the discussions yet, but that's still okay because I see that in the polls there were quite a number of responses. So I thought maybe we could start with that and then we'll move into the questions after that. So I'll just share my screen with you to show you the poll results. Okay. So before I share my screen, is there anything you wanted to say? Did you want to tell us why you wanted to do this module? We heard a little bit from Andrew earlier. Laura, would you like to share with us why you wanted to do this module?
My background is consultancy, industry background, and I think research academically is quite different, the funding style. So that was kind of my interest. I've done a few of the other modules on there. You always get something interesting out of them. So this one seemed something that's a little bit different. I was particularly interested in the legal side of it. Like, what are the main pitfalls you need to think about? I know there's legal teams involved with different things, but obviously research is a bit different to consultancy where you're working for one person. There's all like intellectual property and things, which is vastly different to what I'm used to. So the legal teams will pick that up, but it's just things to be aware of from the start that you have to be quite careful of. That was something I was interested in mainly.
Fantastic, thank you. Anything else you wanted to add, Andrew?
No, not really. Like I just said before, like we were kind of given the opportunity from where I'm working to kind of jump in and learn a little bit more about research as a researcher myself, kind of going through the university system and choosing to be a researcher, and just following that through. It was just kind of good to get a different understanding of the landscape instead of kind of always seeing it from a student standpoint. Kind of seeing it from the other type of bodies and everyone else that's involved is kind of eye-opening because you can kind of better understand that.
And trying to work out within the university, there must be a lot of people that are involved in getting funding and grants and keeping money coming in, but we're kind of sheltered from that as students. We have no idea what's going on with that aspect.
Yeah, so I know from the university system that I work in is like, all academics can apply for grants, but the application of grants, like we follow, I think it was addressed in the media that was put forth, that like we have a grant team. So you kind of go, hey, I want to do this grant, here's my proposal, and they sit there and kind of go, we don't think you'll be a strong contender, politely, I wouldn't put this in, or you've got a good case here, and they help you kind of put it forth to send off to be reviewed.
Yeah, we'll come to that. There was actually a couple of questions about that in the Q and A section. So very, very interesting discussion there that we're going to have shortly. So I will share my screen with you now, and we will look at the poll results. So this is what I had last evening. So this was pretty interesting. So as you can see, 36% had voted for the first option, formulating a funding strategy, and then another 36% voted for managing conflicts to be one of the most challenging aspects when it comes to identifying funding opportunities. Oh, sorry, what happened? Sorry, just one second. Okay, sorry, there you go again. Okay, so the poll question was, what do you think might be the most difficult stage when it comes to applying for funding? So these were the results. There was no vote for the third option, as you can see. But the votes were divided between the three others as well. But to first talk about the 36% of vote for formulating a funding strategy. It is sort of true. I sort of agree with it when it comes down to several, nuanced intricacies that are sort of tied, to the initiation of a project and how that project strategy is required to meet any problems, as well as manage, the larger community that might be involved. This could be the community of researchers and other stakeholders, such as collaborators. So this strategy, in general would have to accommodate, I would say, the potential problems or steps that are needed to reach the project milestones and the completion eventually. And this is something that is difficult to sort of accurately foresee at the beginning. And I think that probably pushed a number of you to vote for this in the first place. And this, I say that it's difficult to foresee at the beginning because that's when funding documents or agreements are usually drafted. And I think on top of this, I think there's also a need that sort of arises to identify appropriate funding sources that, would suit the project that you're working in. And this again requires research and understanding about, various funding organizations and their compatibility with your questions. And I think there's usually a lot of confusion there for researchers at all stages, where to look for funding. I mean, we were just talking about it a few minutes ago, right? So we'll come to that in a minute. So I think one of the key challenges there is to, first of all, manage the expectations of, your funding organization without sort of, compromising your own work. And I think that balance, keeping that balance is one of the most difficult things. I don't know what you were thinking, whether you voted for that first option. If you did, what were your thoughts? Nobody voted.
I haven't got this far yet.
Okay, all right.
Was this week 3, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, like, my thought would be, if I was leaning to one, it'd probably be formulating a funding strategy. But again, if I look back through my journey as a research student, like, it was never really addressed. You never really addressed funding opportunities. Like, you get given your research budget as kind of a gimme when you start. Like, you seldom really have to worry about getting outside funding from an external collaborator. So it's kind of one of those skill sets that, while it is needed for research, unless you're in one of those, from my experience, rare cases of finding it, it's not a skill set you actually develop until you step out and become, maybe you're an independent researcher or tied through a university, where you really don't get that bigger research stipend, or you need to run multiple projects. So it's kind of one of those, you don't really need it until you're out in the big world. And then you kind of like, what do I do? Because I didn't learn anything. And again, I had a friend that went through exam in sports science. I had a friend that went through, that was tied to a sporting organization. And like you kind of addressed, it did kind of interfere with the credibility of their project, because, from a science standpoint, they wanted to go one way, but the organization wanted it to go a different way. And they were constantly kind of tied in the middle between, pleasing the organization because they were getting money from them, but upholding that kind of that scientific rigor.
Absolutely. I think as students, we don't learn some of these skills that are most needed for post research career, and one of them is also conflict management. And I think that is something you will see in this week's content if you haven't gotten very far yet in the content. So conflict management comes into when it comes to collaborations, of course, in projects, and you will see that. We will talk about that a little later as well. But I think to sort of just to say one more thing on this topic, I think it's really important to remember that the funding environment is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving, and more so now because of the pandemic or post-pandemic stage, right? So it's going to take us a lot of time to familiarize ourselves with new funding environments. That's one challenge that I see, at least, and applying for funding is also going to take a little more time than previously because of this constant change. And in recent times, I've seen research teams that I've been working with spend a lot of time in formulating ideas and in applying for funding, and often tweaking a lot of their original ideas just to meet the kind of requirements that were there, that were there by the organizations that were looking at for grants. And they were spending far less time, for example, in addressing in addressing, for example, their topic itself or the aims and objectives of their research. So I feel that in the current climate, it's sort of really difficult to embark on, high risk projects. There are too many unknowns, and also a lot of risk associated with not securing funding. And funding bodies are also more and more strict. They're looking for very sort of concrete and structured project plans, and they really want translatable research outcomes. And it's very difficult for us to sort of judge that, from the outside. And so what researchers are doing is that they're starting to choose very safe projects. So you will see a lot of, research projects that sound very familiar, or that are looking at very similar problems, because they know what the funding body's priorities are, and they just want to get that grant. So sadly, a lot of projects sort of turn out to be descriptive than actual true discovery. So I just wanted to put that out there, just something that I've observed in recent times. What are your thoughts on that? Oh, we have one more person, Zed. Hi, Zed, welcome.
Hello, sorry, I'm in a shared space at the moment.
That's all right, welcome. We're just discussing the poll results.
Awesome.
So yeah, nice to have you.
Listening.
Great. Okay, so any other thoughts on that?
I'm surprised no one's put managing the project. Project management eats up a lot of time and a lot of energy, just trying to kind of project management and managing conflict and keeping everybody happy and making sure things are getting done on time. And that, from my experience not in academia, is a big section of getting the project going and keeping it on track.
Yes, I was surprised too. But I think more than project management, participants found these two options, managing conflict and formulating a funding strategy, probably more difficult. So I think project management was probably least of their worries. But yes, I mean, there's a lot of opinion pieces that are available, for example, on the public domain. I'm going to just share some of the links with you if you're interested in knowing more about developing a funding strategy. You could go through these articles and opinion pieces. So here I'm just going to put them on the chat section for your reading. I think these could be really interesting if you're interested to know more about this changing scenario and how to sort of keep up with these funding opportunities. I think that ties in sort of with one of the questions that were there today in the discussion forum. So the question was, if you're working outside of the university sector, what is the best way to stay in touch with funding opportunities? So I think this would be really helpful. I would say, three things, I think, sort of to sum up, because I spoke a lot earlier, but to sum up and to answer this question, perhaps stay in touch, I would say, with your supervisors, if you're a student, or colleagues, if you're working on any research projects with researchers at your university. So I think the university network is really going to be helpful in this, because if you are not linked to a university system, then tapping into those grants that are only available to those that are within educational institutions is going to be obviously a little difficult. So staying within that network and also being involved in projects with researchers at the university level would be, I think, the first step, and also the easiest step. The other way is also to keep looking out for collaborative opportunities if you're not yet involved in any research projects. And through that, I think you will be able to access funding opportunities. Any other ways that you're aware of?
Not that I can think of, but I'm tied into the university system. So it's kind of, for me, it's just, you're looking for money, you hit up your usual suspects, or you go to your usual lists, or you talk to your kind of research schools, and they kind of direct you. So it's a bit of a hard one for me to try and answer.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you so much. I also want to talk a little bit about managing conflict, because that was the second poll option that drew a lot of votes from most of you. So managing conflict, yes, it's an interesting choice to start with, because conflict management is something that is not usually part of a researcher's training, just like you said, Andrew, earlier today. We're not taught that. We're not we're not exposed to it as students. And then all of a sudden you're into the real world, and you have to manage conflicts between different stakeholders. So that becomes really difficult, right? So so all of a sudden, when you start being involved in large and complex projects, this can be really daunting. And I think that is why this was the other option that was chosen by most of the participants today. And I think the poll sort of indicated that finding the right collaborators was much less a problem as well compared to these two other options. But I think there's a link between finding the right collaborators and managing conflicts, according to me, because maintaining healthy relationships with your collaborators is, I think, an essential element to meet your project milestones. If you're able to meet project milestones, if you're able to meet the expectations of the various stakeholders that are associated with your project, then that sort of reduces the amount of conflict, I would say, to a certain extent. And I think in large institutions, there are specific sort of teams to help, researchers with, we were talking about all the legal aspects earlier when we started the discussion today. So I think there are specific teams in large institutions like universities to help researchers with things like, intellectual property, agreements and collaborations. This, so if you can get access to this sort of help, that would be very, very useful to you, because these would allow you to avoid conflict in the form of, say, authorship disagreements or IP disputes, amongst other things, and sort of help you define pre-agreed terms for conflict resolution. So if you have access to that, I think at QUT we do have that support system. And in your own universities, if you're from a different university, or if you're not, even not from a university system, find out if there's a support system out there. And if there is one, then reach out to them before you start any collaborations. I think they would be able to give you all of the information required about intellectual property and you know how to sort of, you know, create those prenup agreements before the start of a project. And usually those agreements are going to save you from any major conflict in the projects. So conflict management has, I think, a lot to do with, you know, being able to sort of, you know, navigate and manage multiple stakeholders as well as their interests and needs. And I think above everything, managing conflict is of course complex. And as a collaborator, it's really important to sort of be aware of you know, what the objective of your collaboration is. That clarity is required. So having that clarity while remembering to sort of manage your project's main sort of aim is important. It's also equally important to realize that, you know, projects can, you know, evolve with time. So I think another key skill that we need to have as researchers is flexibility and compromise. I think if we can have those two in mind when we're collaborating in a project, that would ensure the success of the project, the collaboration, and also sort of help us avoid conflict. So those are my thoughts on that second poll answer. Do you have anything to say about conflict management in projects, in research projects?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to training, I was someone who's went through high school and straight through the university system, and you don't really get trained how to manage people. Like, you understand it's important in the real world, and you kind of have that assumption, you know, when I get into the real world, I'll get that training, and you kind of help me. And I know I had to do a bit of conflict management during my PhD, and it's hard. Definitely hard, because I didn't feel I was prepared enough to do it. And I think for me as well, as a researcher, as an undergraduate, you're always looking up to these researchers, the academics, and then when you step into the researcher realm, you're on par with them, because, you know, you're meant to lead the project. So it can be very daunting when you go from kind of being the sheep being led to, now I've got to lead these people, and if I've got a problem, you can almost have that imposter syndrome of like, how am I going to address this person who's a professor or who's a doctor, and I'm just some lonely research student? You kind of can't be like, well, what's going on here? And especially if it's a conflict between you and someone else, where that was with me, it can be especially difficult to manage, because then you also have that tied in emotional response where you think you're being hardly done by, where I think, you know, maybe a bit more of awareness or training could have helped avoid that, especially on my behalf.
Yeah, I've been through that. I can totally relate. Laura and Zed, any thoughts?
Yeah, I get the moving from sort of teacher student to peers argument. You realize that lecturers and things are just people. They're not all knowing. They don't know everything about everything. So moving from the industry side, the biggest thing is communication and expectation management, and making sure everyone knows exactly what is going to be delivered and what is everyone's responsibility, making sure that as far as possible, no one's stepping on each other's toes without knowing about it. But it's very hard in real life. People will go off on tangents and do things they're not supposed to, and then someone else will say, oh, I was doing that. And yeah, it kind of, it's quite tricky.
Yeah, correct. Zed?
Yep. I think for me, when it comes to interacting and also, I guess, yeah, interacting with other people. Since I'm not Australian, it's also always under the impression that, you know, I come here and I need to understand people, like how people here think, or how people here do things. So I ended up, I guess in my case, asking a lot of questions to people, like what is the acceptable? It can be as simple as like, okay, how do people send email here, for example? Because I think like in my home country, you are very, very formal to everyone else. And then, so for example, when I interacted with, say, other researchers, and it's very almost text-like, for example. I was honestly at first was a bit surprised because he was like, okay, this is not normal. It's not how I'll interact with other colleague probably in my home country. But regardless, I think it was something that I definitely learning. And because I guess the benefit was that since I come here thinking that they think like everyone else do things differently, I can't assume too much. So I ended up like trying to engage in that practice from the get-go, honestly. Yeah.
This is very interesting. There is definitely a very strong connection between culture and communication. And this is even more interesting because this week, I don't know whether you already had a chance to have a look or not, one of our discussion topics is about how to write to a potential collaborator. So this might be something very interesting. And I had something to share with you about that. So just going to quickly open that little document and share my screen within a couple of seconds. So the discussion topic was, so you were asked to pick someone from the student cafe this week and invite that person, or pick someone up from the discussion forum and invite that person to collaborate with you on a hypothetical research project. So you have to write a little email to the person of your choice. And I was going to share an example of what a good email could look like and what kind of statements would sort of make your email compelling for that potential collaborator to sort of respond back to you. So let me share my screen with you now. Okay. So this is an example taken from a past FLCR students post on the same topic. And as you can see, I have highlighted some of those sentences for you. If you look at the first one, the participant provides a very nice introduction, right, about himself or herself and what he or she is currently doing, the topic of their research. And then there is a really interesting statement, the second highlight there in blue. The participant sort of tells the potential collaborator why he or she should be considered. I think that's very interesting to include. You know, why should someone take interest in what you do? Why should someone collaborate with you? So I think that's something very catchy to have. And finally, the participant sort of provides as well an indication of the potential of this project or this collaboration and the expected outcomes. And I think that's very, very useful to know about when you're drafting an email to a collaborator. Usually cold emails don't really get responses. If you've already tried previously, you would know that for any cold emails that you've sent out, you've hardly received any responses. So in order to catch the attention of the person that you're trying to reach out, you need to really have something that they want. Let me give you another example as well. I have another example to share. Okay, so
is it better to phone someone up and speak to them rather than sending an email? Is that a way of improving the likelihood of collaboration?
That is possible too, but you will have to prepare a really good pitch, because otherwise you have the chances are that they might tell you they're really busy and they might actually disconnect the call, and you will not be able to reach them again. That's happened to me before. So speaking from experience, it was disappointing, because after that they never picked up my call, and I wasn't prepared at that time. I wasn't prepared. I did not have a good pitch, unfortunately. And now that I think about it, in retrospect, my idea was pretty poor at the time. So I had to do a lot of work on my idea first, and then I really had to have a compelling pitch, and I had to keep that pitch under 2 minutes. And then if they were interested, if they were willing to listen to me further, then I had something more prepared. I mean, I had something more for to narrate to them following those 2 minutes. So I think it has to be really planned. I think that the advantage with emailing someone is that they will definitely see it. They will definitely open it. They will definitely at least read the first paragraph of your email, as opposed to a phone call. But yeah, why not? I think I sort of have a bias because of what happened to me with my previous incident. But yes, it is possible. So why not try through all the means that you have? For sure, yes. So here's the second example that I have, once again taken from another student from our previous offerings. And here I've highlighted a few other things that sort of caught my attention in the draft email they had prepared. In this email, the student, of course, provides an introduction about himself, about the research and everything, but the student is a little more precise than the previous the previous participant's email. In this email, you can see that the participant has highlighted the research objectives. You can see that the participant talks about the potential and expected outcomes. Once again, the participant talks about why the potential collaborator has to consider this person. And lastly, there is also a very catchy statement to make that offer very compelling. He or she says, in addition, I plan to expand this research approach into other countries if current research has proved to be successful in Australia. Therefore, your role as a research facilitator will continue to roll out in the next 5 to 10 years. So this is really important, because a lot of researchers or collaborators want to see that this isn't, a short-term project, that it has the potential to be sort of a longitudinal study or a study that can be expanded into a larger study, or that can reach out to other segments of the population or other countries. So I think this statement here is very compelling as a statement, and might attract the person that's reading your email, of course, if that's their motivation for any collaboration. Is there anything else you would add as part of your email, for example?
Kind of cynical, but would you name drop other people that are already collaborating if you've got them?
Yes, I would. If you're already working on a project, I think, why not? Yeah, I would.
If there's someone who's like head of the field, I'm working with so-and-so, I think you can also help in invite, add another aspect of research to the project. So if there's already a big name involved, they might be more inclined to read the rest of the email.
True, I agree with that. We had a student, I think in one of the previous offerings, who said that he or she would actually outline potential challenges. I found that to be very, very interesting because a lot of the times collaborators also want to know what challenges that are associated with your project. They will not believe that this is going to be a very rosy, very easy sort of project to work on. So you don't have to say that right away, but if you do get to have a follow-up discussion, you might want to highlight some challenges and how you already have planned to mitigate them. So that's something interesting that I wanted to share with you. What do you think of that?
Yeah, especially if it's a problem that you think they are better suited than you at solving. You're trying to say, I'm sort of think you are the expert on this. Please, can you help me solve this problem? Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yes. Well, I think apart from that, you could even, as part of your email, if you already have something in place, let's say a research plan, or you already have sort of, if you have preliminary results already. So depending on the stage of your project, if you have anything available that you can share with this collaborator to make your offer compelling, you can do that too. This could mean even, for example, sharing CVs. And something very important. Now, if this collaborator or potential collaborator is from a different jurisdiction, if this person, if there are any requirements for them to be participating in your project, then you must sort of tell them about that too, of course, in a later discussion. But I think to sort of, in your first email, these are the key things that you want to think about and include as part of your email. So I really look forward to seeing your, hypothetical emails this week. So yes, so these are the things that I wanted to share with you. I also had one more document to share with you, but I will probably come to that later. I'm not sure if we will have time. I'll get to answering the questions that we had today. Hopefully I will be able to answer all of them. If not, well, I'll just answer any pending questions in the discussion forum. So the first question I think that I can see is, funding availabilities for domestic and international students are different. How can I, as an international student, get the grants I want and be involved in the research projects I want? So we spoke a little bit about funding already, but having said that, this is a tricky question. And from what I know, when it comes to QET, students are not considered as obviously as staff. Therefore, this actually means that they don't get to have that advantage of having that research load allocations, right? So it is sort of not really possible to apply as a QET member for funding or list, QET or in-kind contributions, for instance. So the only possibility seems to be, from my understanding, is when a QET academic or a QET researcher leads the project and you as the student or the external entity is brought in as a research consultant or a research assistant, or even as a fellow for example. So I'm currently working on a project as an external research fellow with QET. So through that, I'm able to sort of have access to research projects and funding through my team. So it is a possibility if you can look at fellowship opportunities or research assistantship or research consultancies at universities. Generally, though, participating in a project that is not a PhD, if you're a student, would be considered as employment. So you would need to sort of consider any visa or scholarship restrictions, because I know the students have, restrictions. Alexandra, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's for students is 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week. That's a restriction, right, for employment?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I just don't want to put the wrong information, but I can check and post it for you.
Okay, so yeah, it's sort of that. I think students,
Yeah.
cannot do more than 10 or 20 hours of work a week. Oh, Jacqueline says 12 hours. Okay.
Yeah, I think my scholarship's like 1 day a week. So whatever many hours that is, you're supposed to be working.
All right, Jacqueline. Hi, welcome, Jacqueline. Welcome, Mather. I hope I'm saying your names right. I just see that you've joined us. Thank you for joining us.
It's Robin.
Robin. Okay, welcome, Robin. Yes, so I think for international students, they're expected to research or study full-time. So technically, they will not have the time to be part of a larger project in any way, and therefore it might be really difficult to apply for a grant as, of course, a primary applicant or researcher. I hope that answers the question. I think there was another question about grant as well. It says, is there a mentor network or systems to support grant seekers like myself to identify and tap into potential grants and also help build my funding profile? Really, really interesting question. One way I see is that you could contact, if you're at QET, you could contact the mentoring program that's available at QET. I'm sure similar programs are available at other universities. And I think having a mentor is going to really help you in that direction, because the mentor will be a person that's actually specialized in your area, and that is that would be able to give you leads as to where to look for funding, how to look for funding, how to develop your application and your profile as well. So if you have access to a program such as the mentoring program at QET, then please consider enrolling yourself and finding a mentor. And I think the other way you could do that is by asking your supervisors or research collaborators for suggestions and connections. I think I would do that first. That would be my first go-to option if I were you, because they're obviously, aware of your project, your interests, and they know exactly where to, to get those potential grants and which grants are easily achievable than others. So don't hesitate to ask them. The other way I would say is to use your networks. This could be through LinkedIn, ResearchGate. I mean, there's a whole lot of different ways of connecting with people. There's also your peers, people that are studying with you or working with you. Might have a lot of overlaps in terms of the kind of entities that they might approach for grants. There's a lot you can learn from them and ask them for sure. Apart from that, yeah, we just discussed about cold emailing, cold calling, and last but not the least, conferences. I personally would vouch for that, because there's a lot of connections that I made personally when I, went to these different conferences, and most of them turned out somehow to be a mentor of some sort, or even sort of research collaborators. So I think there's a lot that can be achieved through networking and conferences. So definitely consider that. Any other ideas from the rest of you?
I think from me, you've basically hit it. Conferences are usually a pretty good one. From my experience, most people at scientific conferences are pretty well open to any ideas, given it's got some basic merit. And yeah, hitting up my colleagues, like that's what I've done. I've started trying getting a project off the ground, and I just hit up some of my colleagues, and they were able to put me onto someone else. When it kind of came to that cold email, I was able to drop someone they knew and to look, hey, this person's suggested getting in contact with you, and that got me a response in 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. One thing I forgot to mention is that your university research services should also be able to help you with this. At QUT, at least, research services help students and academics with funding and developing a research project. They also help with training and workshops. So approach your university research services and find out what they offer in terms of training, workshop, help with research project development, help with grant writing, and identifying funding. I think you will get a lot of leads there as well. Okay, so next question, let me see. So next question was how to identify the right collaborators and where to look for them. I think this might be one of the toughest challenges for me. Okay. All right. Okay, so I think most of my collaborations so far have been with, people that I either met at conferences, as I told you earlier, or they were former colleagues. So I kept in touch with them. So it was really easy. Or it was an obvious opportunity where, I had something substantial to offer, or where my skills were needed. So to give you an example, I've been working on a project for the past 1.5 years, and I have been working with a team of engineering and scientists, and I don't have that background. My PhD was more about, education, right? So I'm more of a sort of social scientist slash, education enthusiast. So for me to actually work with engineers and scientists wasn't actually, if you think about it, it wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have something specific to offer. So they were looking for somebody with qualitative research skills that they were lacking. All of them were quantitative research experts, and they did not have anybody with qualitative research skills. So that's the gap I sort of was able to fill. So I would say, if you are looking at integrating a team, or are looking to integrate a certain project, try and look for that gap that you might be able to fill. That's another way of getting into projects or getting into collaborations, if you're interested in such collaborations. Now, I'm not sure of any sort of platforms or databases of people who are actually openly available for collaboration. I think for me, what has worked is to sort of do my research and also stay in connection with former colleagues, also make contact with people that, I might think I would like to work with. It doesn't always work, of course. They don't always respond. But we should keep trying. And a good place to sort of start is by sort of identifying and reaching out to say people that are actually publishing in our area. If it's someone that if you need to find someone that you don't already know, then I would say look for people that are publishing in your area of interest. Look at, once again, connections on LinkedIn. Look at your colleagues from your same institution, or professional associations, or your organization if you're working outside of the university sector, and people that you met at conferences. I can't insist on that enough. Would you recommend any other ways other than the ones I've just cited for potential research collaborations? There's something in the chat section. Okay, Alexandra has to leave now. Thank you, Alexandra, for being with us and supporting us. Appreciate it. Okay. Yes, so, well, those are my thoughts. Of course, there are many other ways, right? I've just given you a few ideas, but of course there are 100 other ways you can do this. Now, the other thing I also wanted to say about collaboration is that I think in terms of academic research, collaboration sort of, to me at least, it means an equal partnership between two entities that are, mutually pursuing an interesting and beneficial research. It's going to be beneficial for all stakeholders. However, I feel like today, many collaborations sort of involve researchers from differing stature and funding status, and also types of organizations. So collaborations can involve, several other people's, just those from, research groups of, the main investigators or researchers. This could include, postdoc fellows, research staff members, students, different institutions, companies, so on and so forth. So normally, a significant intellectual contribution by each stakeholder is necessary for this collaboration or interaction to be considered a collaboration and for it to be smooth and successful. However, I feel like perceptions of what constitutes a significant intellectual contribution can vary. So these are things that need to be clarified at the very beginning of any collaboration. And that's the point I wanted to make. You need to make sure that the people that you're collaborating with are on the same page. And you need to make sure of that at the very beginning, because if they're not on the same page, then, as you move forward in the project, you might have some conflicts, right? So something to think about at the early stages of any collaboration, and also to sort of think about this at the agreement stage, which will also be at the early stages of your project. You will be reading about this in the coming weeks. There will be a lot of information about collaborative agreements, about intellectual property in the weeks to come. So the study material will cover that. Now there's one more question there. How do we ensure that we get the best out of collaboration without being overpowered or disadvantaged by the other party? Okay. A lot about collaboration. Okay, so what I can say is that it is very important to set forth, as I said earlier, each party's rights and responsibilities in writing in the early stages of the project. So when rights and responsibilities are discussed, I think consideration must be given to both researchers or both sides, as well as the rights and responsibilities of their respective institutions. So written agreements are, according to me, really helpful in avoiding conflicts in later stages. Agreements are also generally a requirement in most institutions, whether it's an education institution or other. It's also a requirement for sponsors or granting bodies. So you should really check with these different stakeholders that you're engaging with, to see what should be done at the early stages of your project, and to be able to make that collective decision on agreeing, to work on this project and to agree on certain terms and conditions. So to be very specific, in weeks 4 and 5, you will learn about agreements, intellectual property, I think conflicts of interest as well. So yeah, these 3 things will be covered in weeks 4 or 5. That'll be next week and the week after. Yes, so I think I've covered all of the questions, and we are at the end of our session. Do you have any final comments to share? Anything to say before we end this? Unfortunately, it's just an hour. I know I wish I would go on and do some activities as well, but unfortunately we're given an hour's time. Any comments?
Look, I don't have any, besides just obviously thanking you for your time and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's useful. I think it would have been more useful further towards the end of the course, when we've had a bit more covered in the course. I don't know, sometime early week 5, maybe something like that, rather than the beginning of week 3, because there's an awful lot left we've still got to cover. So I'm sure we'll have a lot more questions later on. But I'm sure you haven't got any saying when it's done. But just from a personal point of view, I'm sure there's things that will come up later on that would be good to have a chat about.
I agree with you. I think the reason why eGrad School decided to have these sessions in week 3 is probably because of student numbers towards the end of
right. Okay.
I think there's a lot of dropouts towards week 4, week 5. There's a lot of them that start to leave. I think that would be the main reason. But yes, I totally agree with you. I think it would be more interesting to have it in week 5, for example, because you would have studied all of the materials. I think it would be much richer conversation at that stage. But yes, I really appreciate your questions. I think there's so much we can learn from each other. I loved hearing your experiences, and I really hope that you will enjoy the rest of the weeks, and that we'll continue to interact. And also, I would also like to wish you the best with whatever that is that you're doing. Of course, I'll see you in my next 2 videos, and we'll continue chatting in the discussion forum. So thank you very much for your time and for your enthusiasm. I really appreciate it.